My mother looked at me with pure disdain and said, "You're here out of courtesy, not because you matter." My brother, Frank, laughed in my face. "At least they let you in," he snickered. I just smiled and said, "Noted." 4 days later, their joint account was locked, the utility bills on their luxury condo bounced, and a lawyer's letter was on its way. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The polished surface of the restaurant table felt impossibly cold beneath my palms. It was a stark contrast to the burning humiliation creeping up my neck, a sensation I had, unfortunately, grown accustomed to. I was sitting at the head of a long, banquet-style table at L'Orangerie, a restaurant so exclusive that its name was only ever spoken in hushed, reverent tones. The crystal glasses sparkled, the silverware gleamed under the soft, ambient lighting, and the air hummed with the quiet conversations of the city's elite. I was paying for all of it. Every last crumb of artisan bread, every ridiculously priced bottle of imported water, every sip of vintage champagne. This entire, opulent display was my treat for my mother, Margaret's, 71st birthday. And I was sick. Not just emotionally, though the weight of my family's entitlement was a chronic illness in itself. No, I was physically ill. 2 days prior, my doctor had confirmed what the persistent fatigue and recurring cough had been hinting at for months: a severe case of walking pneumonia, complicated by what he called critical exhaustion. His prescription had been unequivocal: absolute bed rest, zero stress, and an immediate, drastic reduction in my workload. I had tried to explain this to my mother. When I'd called her that morning, my voice a raspy whisper, I had suggested we postpone the grand celebration. "Mom, I'm really not well," I'd croaked. "The doctor has ordered strict rest. Can we maybe do a quiet dinner next week when I'm feeling stronger?" Margaret's response had been instantaneous, a whip-crack of indignation through the phone line. "Absolutely not, Megan. Do you know how long I've been looking forward to this? Frank has already told all his friends we're going to L'Orangerie. You can't just cancel my birthday. That is the most selfish thing I have ever heard. Just take some medicine. You'll be fine." So here I was, propped up by a dangerous amount of cold medicine, my lungs aching with every shallow breath, my head swimming from a low-grade fever. I had plastered on a smile, wrapped myself in a silk dress, and was personally hosting 20 of my mother's and brother's closest friends. People whose names I didn't know, and who, I was certain, didn't know mine, beyond my function as the family bank. My brother, Frank, 42 years old and a perpetual, aspiring entrepreneur. A title that meant he had never held a job for more than 6 months, was holding court at the other end of the table. He was loud, brash, and regaling the table with a story about a guaranteed crypto investment, his hands gesturing wildly, sloshing champagne from the glass I'd paid for. My mother, Margaret, was beaming at him. She looked radiant, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her jewelry, a diamond necklace I'd bought her last Christmas, sparkling. She adored Frank. He was her golden boy, the charming, witty son who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was just the architect. The work-obsessed, cold, and unfeeling daughter who, ever since my father died, had silently and dutifully shouldered the responsibility of maintaining the comfortable, luxurious lifestyle they had both become accustomed to. The main courses were cleared, and the waiter, with a nod from me, brought out the towering chocolate mousse cake, candles blazing. The table burst into a ragged, happy birthday. Margaret blew out the candles to a smattering of applause. "Speech, speech," Frank bellowed, raising his glass. Margaret, glowing from the attention, stood up. She thanked her wonderful friends for coming. She thanked her darling son, Frank, for being her rock, her joy, her everything. She went on for 5 minutes, lauding Frank's brilliant mind and unwavering support. I sat there, my smile feeling more like a grimace. My contribution, the condo she lived in, the car she drove, the generous monthly stipend, this very party, was, as always, invisible. When she finished, Frank, still standing, raised his glass higher. "And let's not forget my sister, Megan," he announced, his tone dripping with a sarcasm that only I could fully decipher. "The family ATM, thanks for the party, sis. As usual, your money, if not your personality, is a huge hit." Laughter trickled around the table. It was a familiar jab, one he'd used for years. I tried to let it slide off me. But tonight, fueled by fever and exhaustion, the barb found its mark. I felt a hot, angry flush beneath my skin. I decided to try. For once, I wanted to be seen as more than a transaction. I slowly, painfully, pushed my chair back and stood up. The room tilted for a second, and I gripped the table to steady myself. I'd also like to say something," I began, my voice huskier than I intended. The chatter died down. All eyes turned to me. "Mom," I said, looking directly at Margaret. "Happy birthday. I know this last year has been a lot, and I know I work a lot, but I do it so that you and Frank are taken care of, so you don't have to worry." I took a shaky breath, my lungs protesting. "I do it because I love you, and all I've ever really wanted is..." I trailed off, unsure how to finish. "For you to love me back, for you to see me." Margaret's face, which had been wreathed in smiles for Frank, hardened. The warmth vanished, replaced by a familiar, icy impatience. She looked at me not as a daughter, but as an interruption, as an inconvenience. She cut me off, her voice low but carrying in the sudden silence. "Megan, please sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." I stared at her, confused. I just wanted to say happy birthday." She sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance. Then, she delivered the line that would sever the last, frayed thread holding us together. "You're here out of courtesy, Megan, not because you matter." Silence, a thick, suffocating blanket of it fell over the table. The friends suddenly found their napkins fascinating. Even the waiters froze. I couldn't breathe. It was as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs, replaced by crushed ice. "Not because you matter." I turned my head, my movements stiff and robotic, to look at Frank. He was watching me, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He leaned forward, his voice a conspiratorial stage whisper for the whole table to hear. "At least they let you in." He laughed, a short, barking sound that echoed in the dead silence. And that was it. The pain, the humiliation, the years of quiet sacrifice and unrequited love, it all just stopped. The burning in my chest wasn't the pneumonia anymore. It was something else. It was the click of a lock falling into place. I looked at my mother, her face a mask of cold indifference. I looked at my brother, his eyes glittering with petty malice. And I smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was the smile of an architect reviewing a blueprint, finding a critical, load-bearing wall that had been compromised and knowing, with absolute certainty, it had to come down. I slowly lowered myself back into my chair. I picked up my fork, my hand perfectly steady. "Noted," I said, my voice clear and calm. The betrayal, I realized, wasn't the sickness. The sickness was the cure. It had given me the clarity to see the infection that had been poisoning my life for decades. The ride home was silent, save for the slick sound of the town car's tires on the damp pavement. The driver, a man from the service my firm kept on retainer, had taken one look at my face when I'd exited the restaurant, leaving Margaret and Frank to enjoy the rest of their evening, and hadn't said a word. He'd simply held the door, the picture of professional discretion. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, the city lights blurring into long, watercolor streaks. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a profound, hollow ache. The fever was back, prickling at my skin, and each breath was a shallow, painful effort. But beneath the physical misery, something new was taking root. A cold, hard resolve. "You're here out of courtesy, not because you matter." Margaret's words replayed in my mind, not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. A fact. I had been operating under the illusion that I was a daughter, a sister, a beloved part of a family. They had just corrected me in the clearest terms possible. I was a courtesy, a convenience, a service provider. And service providers, I thought, as a sharp cough rattled my ribs, have contracts. They have terms, and they have the right to terminate services when the clients are in breach. When I got back to my apartment, a quiet, minimalist space that was my only true sanctuary, I didn't go to bed despite the doctor's orders. Instead, I went to my study. I bypassed the sleek, modern desk where I sketched designs and went to the large, custom-built shelving unit that housed my files. Not my architectural blueprints, but the thick, bound folders that detailed my other major project, the Margaret and Frank Preservation Trust. It wasn't actually a trust, not in the legal sense. That had been my mistake. I'd wanted to keep things simple, flexible. It was just my life, my assets, my name. I pulled out a thick black binder labeled Condominium 18B Riverwalk. I opened it. There it was, the deed. My signature, clear and bold at the bottom. Megan Elizabeth Vance, sole owner. I pulled out another, vehicle black sedan. The title, Megan Elizabeth Vance. Another, joint account 8819. This one was a shared checking account I'd set up at their bank, linked to one of my own business accounts. I had set up an automatic, generous transfer for the first of every month to cover their living expenses. Dinners out, clothes, Frank's business, lunches, Margaret's salon appointments. But I was the primary funding account holder. They were just authorized users. I sat on the floor of my study, surrounded by the paper infrastructure of their lives, and a single, recurring thought echoed in my head, a counterpoint to their cruelty. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who exactly I was. They saw me as the boring daughter, the workaholic, the pushover. They had mistaken my generosity for weakness, my competence for a lack of personality. They had never once, in all these years, stopped to think about what I actually did for a living. I wasn't just an architect. I owned a firm. I designed, built, and managed complex, multi-million-dollar projects. I dealt with cutthroat contractors, navigated labyrinthine city zoning laws, and negotiated ironclad contracts with corporate clients who would eat you alive if you showed a moment's weakness. My job wasn't just drawing pretty pictures. It was about structure, foundations, and consequences. They thought I was their ATM. They had forgotten the ATM is connected to a bank, and the bank always knows the balance. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been run over. The pneumonia had taken advantage of my emotional distress and was now fully engaged in a hostile takeover of my lungs. I called my assistant, a ruthlessly efficient woman named Chloe, and told her I was taking an immediate, indefinite medical leave. I told her to cancel all my meetings and to forward all critical matters to my second-in-command. Everything, she asked, her voice tinged with a rare note of concern. Even the presentation for the city council. Everything, I croaked. Except for one, I need you to book me a conference call with Graham. Graham was my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the sharpest, most formidable corporate litigator in the city. He handled all my firm's contracts and had, on more than one occasion, ripped a competitor to shreds in negotiations with nothing but a quiet voice and a deep knowledge of their every weakness. "Book it for when?" Chloe asked. 10 minutes from now, I said and hung up. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping hot water and lemon, when my phone rang. "Megan," Graham's smooth, baritone voice said, "Chloe said it was urgent. You sound terrible. Are you all right?" "No," I said simply, "but I'm about to be. Graham, I need to evict a tenant." There was a pause. "A tenant from one of your commercial properties?" "No," I said, looking out the window at the gray city morning. "From my personal property, my mother." Another pause, this one longer. Graham had known my family for years. He de-handled my father's will, the will that had left everything to Margaret, who, with Frank's help, had managed to burn through the entire estate in under 3 years, forcing me to step in. Graham knew exactly who they were. "I see," he said, his voice dropping into that calm, dangerous tone I knew so well. "And what, precisely, is the situation?" I told him. I recounted the entire dinner. The setup, the humiliation, the fever. And then I repeated the two sentences that had changed everything. You're here out of courtesy, not because you matter. At least they let you in. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. I could practically hear him processing, the legal cogs turning. Well, Graham said finally, his voice devoid of all emotion save for a chilling professionalism. Courtesy, as a legal concept, is non-binding, and mattering is not a prerequisite for tenancy, but a lease agreement, or lack thereof, certainly is. Tell me, Megan, what would you like to do? I want them out, I said, the words tasting like freedom, and I want to sever every financial tie. Today. That's a sound structural decision, Graham replied. Let's review the blueprints. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that I don't just build things. I also know, better than anyone, how to tear them down. To understand the chill in my voice as I spoke to Graham, you have to understand the warmth I had poured into my family for 2 decades, receiving only frostbite in return. My father was an engineer, a kind, brilliant, and tragically unassertive man. He saw the world in numbers and blueprints, and he adored my mother, Margaret, for being his opposite, vibrant, social, and utterly charming. He also, to his detriment, saw his son, Frank, as a late-blooming version of himself. He'd always say, "Frank's a people person, Megan. You've got the bra. He's got the charm. You'll both go far." The problem was, Frank's charm was a predatory instinct. He had learned early on that he could get anything he wanted from our mother with a well-timed smile and a honey-laced compliment. From me, he just took. He'd borrow my meticulously saved allowance, my college textbooks, and later my money, always with the same dismissive air. "Come on, Megan, you don't even use it. You're always just working." I, on the other hand, was my father's daughter. I inherited his mind for structure and his quiet diligence. While Frank was the high school quarterback and prom king, I was the one winning state mathletics trophies and building a scale model of our town's historic district for the library. When I went to architecture school on a full scholarship, Frank flunked out of 3 different community colleges, each time blaming uninspired professors. When I was pulling all-nighters as an unpaid intern at a prestigious firm, Frank was finding himself on a backpacking trip through Europe, funded by my father. Then, when I was 28 and just starting to make a name for myself, my father had a massive, unexpected coronary. He was gone in an instant. The grief was a tidal wave, but it was the financial aftermath that truly drowned us. My father, in his adoring but naive way, had left everything to Margaret, with no trust, no provisions, no oversight. Margaret and Frank, united in their shared grief and financial incompetence, were a disaster. Frank, stepping into the man of the house role he'd always craved, convinced Margaret that my father's portfolio was stagnant. He had a friend, he said, a real visionary, who was launching a revolutionary new tech-infused agri-pharmaceutical crypto venture. It was a sure thing. They invested everything. It took them less than 3 years to lose it all. The house, the stocks, my father's pension, everything. I found out when a moving truck was parked in front of my childhood home. Margaret called me, hysterical, blaming my dead father for leaving them in this mess. I was 31, I had just made partner at my firm, I had savings, so I stepped in. I didn't do it out of love, not really. I did it out of a misguided sense of duty, out of respect for my father's memory. I bought the upscale condo on Riverwalk. I put it in my name. "Just until you get back on your feet, Mom," I said, knowing full well that day would never come. I bought a reliable car, also in my name, for her to get around. And I set up the joint account, a stipend to cover their expenses so Margaret wouldn't have the stress of managing bills. For 17 years, I had been their pillar, their foundation. I paid for Margaret's condo, her utilities, her car, her health insurance, her groceries, her clothing, her vacations. I funded Frank's endless series of startups, the bespoke sneaker cleaning service, the artisanal avocado toast delivery app, the ill-fated influencer management agency. Each one failed more spectacularly than the last, and each time he would return to Margaret, who would call me. "Megan, darling," she'd purr, "Frank just needs a little bridge loan. His new idea is so clever, you have to support your brother." And I did, because I was the responsible one, the boring one, the one who worked. I never got a thank you, not once. Instead, I got criticism. My clothes were too severe. My apartment was cold. My devotion to my career was unnatural for a woman. "You should really try to be more like Frank, Megan," Margaret would say over a Sunday dinner I was paying for. "He just enjoys life. You should learn to relax." Relaxing, for them, was a full-time occupation funded by me. The true antagonist, I realized as I sat in my study with Graham on the line, wasn't just my mother's narcissism or my brother's parasitic laziness. It was their synergy. They were a two-person con, a perfect ecosystem of entitlement. Margaret provided the emotional justification, and Frank executed the grift. She was the polished, respectable victim who needed help, and he was the charming, lazy, golden boy who deserved it. They were a matched set, and I had been the fool paying for their upkeep. "Graham," I said, my voice horsey, "the condo on Riverwalk. The utilities are all on my firm's corporate account. The car is paid for by a direct debit from my personal checking. And the stipend account, I am the sole funding source." "Excellent," Graham said. "Clean, uncomplicated. A severance of this nature is a simple three-step process. First, we cut the cash flow. Second, we secure the assets. Third, we deliver the notice. Are you prepared to proceed with all three, Megan?" "I am," I said. "Good," he replied. "Step 1, I'll need you to come to my office to sign the fund transfer stop orders. And Megan, bring the deed and the car title. We'll transfer them into a holding company, effective immediately. It's time to put a firewall. L between you and them." A firewall, I liked the sound of that. I was finally building something for myself, a wall. The next 3 days were a blur of feverish activity, both physical and logistical. My pneumonia had dug in its heels, and I was running on a cocktail of antibiotics, cough syrup, and pure, unadulterated spite. But for the first time in my life, the illness felt like a shield. It gave me a valid, ironclad excuse to ignore the world, specifically the 14 missed calls from Margaret and the 22 texts from Frank that had piled up since the dinner. The texts were a predictable blend of manipulative tactics. From Margaret, "Megan, I am very disappointed in your behavior. Walking out on your mother's birthday like that, you need to apologize." From Frank, "Hey, Mom's really upset. You made her cry, not cool." From Margaret, "Are you screening my calls? This is childish. Frank needs you to look over a new business proposal. It's very promising." From Frank, "Yo, you good. The stipend hasn't hit my account yet, usually here on the 1st. Check it." That last text, which arrived on day 3, was the one I'd been waiting for. I was sitting in Graham's conference room, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. The room was cool and quiet. On the table in front of me was a stack of freshly signed documents. I had physically dragged myself to his office, my face pale and masked. Graham had taken one look at me and insisted I lie down on the plush sofa in his office while he brought me tea and had his paralegal witness my signatures. The clever trap, as it turned in, wasn't complicated at all. It was just the truth finally weaponized. The leverage was simply my name, Megan E. Vance. "So," Graham said, sitting opposite me, "step 1 is complete. As of 2 hours ago, the joint account you shared with them is closed. The funds were transferred to a new account in your name only, and the automatic transfer from your business account has been terminated." I nodded, sipping the tea. "Good." "Step 2, he continued, tapping a folder. "The utilities for the Riverwalk condo, power, water, gas, internet, the building's management fees, have all been disassociated from your firm's corporate account. The utility companies have been notified that as of today, the billing responsibility reverts to the residents of Unit 18B. "And the residents," I whispered, "are Margaret and Frank." "Precisely," Graham smiled. "I expect they'll receive their first unsubsidized bill, or more likely a disconnection notice, within 48 hours. And finally, step 3. He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished mahogany table. It was addressed to Margaret and Frank, last name, at the Riverwalk condo. "This," he said, "is a formal notice to quit. It outlines that they are not, and have never been, tenants with a lease. They are occupants residing at the sole discretion of the owner, you, and that discretion has been rescinded. It gives them 30 days to vacate the property." 30 days, I frowned. That feels generous. "It's the law, Megan," Graham said gently. "Even for squatters, which is legally what they are. But," he added, a small glint in his eye, "the notice also states that as of today, they are liable for rent at the full market rate for every day they remain in the property, a sum which I have taken the liberty of calculating." He named a figure that made my eyes widen. "Should they fail to pay, we can and will sue them for it." "They don't have that kind of money," I said flatly. "They don't have any money." "I know," Graham said. "That's why it's so effective. The letter is being delivered by a court-registered courier. It should be arriving right about now." As if on cue, my phone, sitting on the table between us, lit up. "Incoming call, Margaret." I looked at it, Graham looked at it. "This," Graham said, "is the part where you must be the foundation, Megan, not the bulldozer. Let the documents do the work. Do not engage. Do not explain. Do not defend. You are a corporation, and this is a business decision." I took a deep, rattling breath. "Noted," I said, and hit ignore. The phone immediately buzzed DZ again. "Incoming call, Frank." I ignored it. Then the text started, a rapid-fire assault. "Frank, MEGAN, pick up. What did you do?" "Frank, the account is locked. My card was declined ATSDARBUCKS. This isn't funny. Frank, are you insane? Call me. Mom is freaking out. Margaret, Megan Elizabeth Vance, you call me this instant. This is an outrage. My card was declined at the grocery store. I've never been so humiliated. Frank, what is this letter? What the hell is a notice to quit? Frank, pick up your phone, you cowardly." I turned the phone over, silencing the screen. "I need to go home," I said to Graham, feeling a sudden wave of dizziness. I'm very tired." "Of course," Graham said, standing up and helping me to my feet. "You've done the hard part. Now you rest. Let the me. Dissing work. Let the lawyers work." He walked me to the elevator, his hand lightly on my back. "Megan," he said as the doors opened, "you're not just an architect, you're the developer, you're the client, and you're the bank. They just built their house on your fault line." "They did," I agreed. "They forgot the most crucial thing, Megan." I looked at him, my fever-bright eyes meeting his. "What's that, Graham?" "You're the one," he said, "who knows how to read the blueprints." I slept for 18 hours. It was a deep, antibiotic-fueled sleep, devoid of dreams. When I finally woke, it was to the sound of pounding. For a disoriented moment, I thought it was the throbbing in my head. But no, it was real. Someone was hammering on the door of my apartment. I dragged myself out of bed, my body aching, and shuffled to the entryway. I looked through the peephole. It was Margaret and Frank. My blood ran cold, then hot. How dare they? They had never, in 17 years, come to my apartment unannounced. They hated my neighborhood, hated my sterile building. The pounding came again, louder this time, accompanied by Frank's muffled shout. "Megan, open this door. We know you're in there. Your car is in the garage." I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I could just not answer. I could call security. That would be the Graham thing to do. But then I heard my mother's voice, high and thin. "This is absurd. Megan, open up. You are in so much trouble." Trouble, the word was so preposterous, so utterly divorced from reality, that a sudden, icy rage cleared the fog from my brain. I unlatched the deadbolt. I opened the door. They practically fell into the foyer, propelled by their own righteous indignation. Frank, his face a mottled red, was in the lead. Margaret, clutching her pearls, was right behind him, the lawyer's letter crumpled in her fist. They both started talking at once. "What is the meaning of this?" Margaret shrieked, shaking the letter at me. "Eviction, eviction, Are you out of your mind? You shut off our money, Frank yelled, his voice cracking. My card declined at Starbucks, Megan. Do you know how that feels? I just looked at them. They were a pathetic sight. Frank, in his designer knockoff tracksuit, looked like a spoiled teenager. My mother, in her cashmere coat, a birthday gift from me, was breathing hard, her carefully applied makeup slightly smeared. Are you finished? I asked. My voice came out as a low, gravelly rasp. It was surprisingly effective. They both shut their mouths, looking momentarily stunned. Good, I said. I turned and walked slowly into my living room, not inviting them to follow, but knowing they would. I lowered myself onto my sofa. You have 5 minutes. My doctor says I'm not supposed to have any stress. Stress, Margaret screeched, following me. You're talking to me about stress. You cut us off. You're throwing your own mother out on the street. I am not, I said calmly, looking up at her. I am asking the occupants of my property to vacate, as is my right as the owner. Margaret's face went blank. Your property, that's my home, your father and I. Dad's gone, Mom. I cut in, my voice sharp. He's been gone for 17 years. You and Frank burned through his entire estate in 3. The condo is not your home. It is a piece of real estate that I purchased, that I own, and that I have graciously and foolishly allowed you to live in rent-free for over a decade and a half. Frank scoffed, crossing his arms. Oh, here we go. Look at me, I'm Megan, I'm so successful, I pay for everything. You love holding this over us, don't you? It makes you feel big. No, Frank, I said, meeting his gaze. It makes me feel tired. It makes me feel sick. And as of 3 days ago, it makes me feel finished. You can't do this, Margaret said, her voice dropping, shifting tactics. This was the disappointed mother voice. This is not how you were raised. A family takes care of each other. A family? I let out a short, harsh laugh that turned into a hacking cough. I grabbed a tissue and pressed it to my mouth. A family? Is that what we are? At your birthday dinner, you told me in front of 20 people that I don't matter, that I was only there as a courtesy. And you, I said, pointing a trembling finger at Frank, you laughed. At least they let you in. Frank had the grace to look away, but Margaret was unfazed. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said, waving a dismissive hand. You're still on about that. It was a party. I was joking. You're always so sensitive, Megan. You can't take a joke. It wasn't a joke, Mom, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It was the first honest thing you've said to me in 20 years. I stood up, my legs shaking, but my resolve firm. I am not your daughter. I am not your sister. I am your courtesy. And my courtesy has just been revoked. I walked back to the door in awe. Pendant, get out. We're not going anywhere, Frank blustered, trying to regain his footing. You can't just kick us out. We have rights. No, Frank, you don't, I said. That's the part you've never understood. You have privileges. Privileges that I paid for, and I'm done. The letter from my lawyer is not a suggestion. It's a legal notification. You have 30 days. And what are we supposed to do? Margaret wailed. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. That, I said, is an excellent question. One you probably should have asked yourselves before you decided to humiliate your sole source of income. I'd suggest Frank finally put that brilliant mind of his to work and get a job. You have 30 days to figure it out. Frank's face contorted in rage. You'll be sorry, he hissed, jabbing a finger at me. You can't do this to us. I'll tell everyone what you did. I'll tell them how you abandoned your family. Go ahead, I said. Tell them. And while you're at it, tell them about the condo I paid for, the car I paid for, the food you ate, the clothes you're wearing, the phone you're holding. Tell them the whole story, Frank. See who they side with. He paled. He had no answer. Get out, I said again, my voice raw. Margaret, seeing the tide had turned, tried one last time. Megan, baby, she said, her voice thick with false tears. You're sick. You're not thinking straight. Let's all calm down. Why don't you call your bank and just fix this? Turn the account back on. We can talk about this. I looked at her, at the woman who had given birth to me, who had never once mothered me. Noted, I said, and stared at her until she and Frank finally backed out of my doorway. I shut the door, slid the deadbolt, and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The confrontation was over. The case was just beginning. The silence that followed their departure was heavier than before. It was the eye of the storm quiet. I knew this wasn't over. I had won the confrontation, but the war for my freedom was just beginning. They wouldn't just leave. Their entire sense of self was built on the foundation of my servitude. I went back to Graham. My pneumonia was finally receding, but I was still weak. Graham, however, was energized. "They're desperate," he said, handing me a file. "And desperate people make mistakes. Your brother, Frank, has been busy." "Busy?" I asked, opening the folder. "He's been trying to access your credit." My blood froze. "What?" "He called your primary bank, the one that holds your firm's accounts, and tried to identify himself as your financial partner. He said you were incapacitated and that he needed to be granted emergency access to all funds. He had your social security number, your mother's maiden name, all the keys." I felt sick. My social. He must have gotten it from the tax documents I sent to the condo for their records. "Exactly," Graham said. "Thankfully, your bank's security protocols are excellent." The moment he mentioned incapacitated, they put a red flag on the account and cross-referenced with my office, as I'm listed as your legal counsel. The request was denied, and a fraud alert has been placed on all your accounts. "My God, Graham," I whispered. "He was trying to steal everything." "He was," Graham said grimly. "Which brings me to my next point. This isn't just a family dispute anymore, Megan. This is attempted fraud. It's criminal, and it gives us leverage. But I've been doing some digging of my own. I didn't think Frank was smart enough to come up with this on his own, so I had a private investigator run a check on him. Specifically, his business ventures." He pulled out another folder. This one was thicker. "Your brother's startup ideas weren't just failures, Megan. They were scams. The influencer management agency. He took thousands of dollars from aspiring models for portfolio fees and then vanished. The artisanal avocado toast app. He collected pre-order payments for 6 months with no intention of ever building the platform. He's left a trail of small claims court judgments and angry victims all over the state." I stared at the documents. It was all there. A history of petty, pathetic fraud. "He's a con man," I said, the words tasting like ash. "A cheap, lazy con man." "And your mother," Graham continued, his voice gentle, "has been his willing accomplice. She co-signed on his business bank accounts. She was the references he gave to the models. She's implicated." It was all so much worse than I thought. It wasn't just entitlement. It was rot. A deep, systemic corruption of character. My phone rang. It was Margaret. I stared at it. "I have to end this," I said, more to myself than to Graham. "All of it." I answered the phone and put it on speaker. "Megan," Margaret's voice was frantic, a stark contrast to her usual cool disdain. "Thank God, the power is off, Lights just went out in the condo. The internet is gone, and the building manager just slipped a notice under the door about imminent disconnection of the water. What is going on?" "It's called paying your own bills, Mom," I said, my voice dead. "Pay them with what? You locked our accounts. Frank's card is still declined. This is inhumane. You've left us in the dark." "You've been in the dark for 17 years, I said. "You're just now noticing." "Frank went to the bank," she shrieked. "He tried to fix this, and they treated him like a criminal. They accused him of fraud. Fraud, Megan, your own brother. How could you do that to him?" "I didn't do it, Mom," I said, looking at the file Graham had given me. "Frank did. He's been doing it for years." "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "I'm talking about the influencer agency, Mom. I'm talking about the dozens of people he stole from. I'm talking about the court judgments. I'm talking about the fact that he tried to drain my bank accounts this morning by lying and saying I was incapacitated." The line went completely silent. The only sound was Margaret's sharp, panicked breathing. He told me that was a misunderstanding," she finally stammered. He said. He was just trying to help, to pay the bills. He was trying to steal, Mom, just like he's been stealing from me, from us, for our entire lives. And you've been holding the ladder for him. That is not true, she cried, but her voice was weak, the conviction gone. This is over, I said, all of it. Graham is in the room with me. We have a file, a very thick file. It details every one of Frank's scams. It details your involvement. You have two options. I let the silence stretch. Either, I continued, my voice like steel, you and Frank sign the agreement Graham is sending over right now, a full and final severance, relinquishing any and all claims to my assets, my estate, or my name forever. You will walk away from the condo, the car, and any connection to me, and I will not press charges for the attempted fraud. Or, I will. You wouldn't, she whispered. Your own brother. Try me, I said. He's not my brother, you're not my mother. You told me so yourselves, I'm just a courtesy. And my courtesy has expired. You have 24 hours to sign the papers. If you don't, I am handing this entire file to the district attorney. And Frank, Mom, will go to jail. You might even go with him. I hung up the phone. I looked at Graham. My hands were shaking, but my heart was steady. It's done, I said. Almost, he said. They'll fight. They'll try one last public, desperate move, be ready. He was right. The public showdown I was expecting didn't happen. Instead, they opted for something far more pathetic and far more typical of them. They tried to ambush me. 3 days later, I was finally cleared by my doctor to return to work for a few hours. I felt weak, but resolute. I was walking into the lobby of my firm's building, a sleek, glass and steel tower that I had designed, when the doorman gave me a troubled look. Ms. Vance, he said, you have visitors. They insisted on waiting. I looked over, and there they were. Sitting on a plush leather sofa in the lobby, looking utterly out of place, were Margaret and Frank. Frank jumped to his feet the moment he saw me. There she is. There's the monster who's throwing her own family out on the street. The lobby was busy. People were walking in, getting coffee. A few of my own employees, returning from lunch, froze. Margaret, who was clearly in on this, put her head in her hands and began to sob loudly. My own daughter, she wailed. Turning off our power, leaving us in the cold, after everything I've done for her. I stopped. I looked at Frank, his face puffed up with self-righteousness. I looked at Margaret, putting on the worst performance of her life. I looked at the curious, concerned, and embarrassed faces of the people watching. This was their final move, public humiliation. They were trying to shame me, to back me into a corner, to make me fix this to stop the scene. The old Megan would have been mortified. She would have hissed, "Stop it, what are you doing?" She would have dragged them into an office and written a check to make them go away. But the old Megan had burned away with the fever. I stood there for a long moment. Then, very calmly, I pulled out my phone. Frank, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the marble lobby. What you are doing right now is called harassment. You are trespassing on private property, and you are creating a public disturbance. We're not trespassing, he shot back. We're here to talk to you, to beg you not to make your mother homeless. My mother, I said, is homeless because she and her 42-year-old son are con artists who have been committing fraud for years. Margaret's sobs hitched, the lob. Why went dead silent? What? Frank stammered. Oh, you didn't know, I said, taking a step toward them. I'm not talking about the fraud you committed against me, trying to drain my bank accounts while I was sick with pneumonia. I let that hang in the air. I saw one of my senior partners, halfway up the stairs, stop and turn. I'm talking, I continued, my voice getting stronger, about the influencer agency. About the girls you stole portfolio fees from. I'm talking about the avocado toast app and the hundreds of pre-orders you took for a product you never intended to make. I'm talking about the court judgments. Frank's face went from red to a ghostly, pasty white. He looked like he'd been punched. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice was a squeak. You don't, I said. That's okay, because I have the file, the very thick file, the one my lawyer, Graham, compiled. I held up my phone. In fact, I was just on my way to a meeting with the district attorney to give him this file. Margaret's head snapped up. The tears were gone. Her eyes were wide with pure animal terror. "Megan, don't." "Don't what, Mom?" I said, walking right up to them. "Don't tell the truth. Isn't that what you've always wanted me to do? Stop being so boring. Well, this is exciting, isn't it? We have fraud, we have theft, we have potential jail time. It's a regular primetime drama." Frank, in a moment of sheer, idiotic panic, made his final, fatal mistake. He lunged at me. He didn't try to hit me, he tried to grab my phone. He never even got close. The building's security team, who had been watching from the desk, were on him in a second. Two large men grabbed Frank's arms and slammed him, face first, against the wall. "Get off me," he screamed. "I'd like to press charges," I said, my voice ringing in the silence. "Assault." "Megan," Margaret shrieked, jumping to her feet. "No, he's your brother, it was a mistake. Frank, tell her you're sorry." I'm sorry," Frank yelled, his face pressed into the drywall. I looked at him, a 42-year-old man, being held by security in the lobby of my building. I looked at my mother, her face a mask of horror and desperation. Then I looked at the head of security. "Hold them," I said. "The police are on their way." I turned to my mother. "The agreement from my lawyer," I said. "The one that severs all ties. The one that protects Frank from prosecution for the other crimes. It's on your lawyer's desk. You have until the police get here to call him and tell him to sign it." You're blackmailing us," she gasped. "No, Mom," I said, adjusting the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "I'm not. I'm an architect. I'm just showing you the blueprint. This is the only load-bearing wall you have left. You sign the severance agreement, I drop the assault charge and the fraud investigation. You don't, and he goes to jail, and I will sleep just fine tonight." Margaret stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. She saw it in my eyes, the truth, the end. She fumbled for her phone. Send me the papers," she whispered, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. I nodded to my assistant, Chloe, who had been watching from the sidelines. "Chloe, please call Graham. Tell him the clients are ready to sign. And send a copy of the fully executed agreement to the head of security here. Once it's signed, I gestured to my family, are to be escorted off the property and permanently banned." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked toward the elevators, the click-clack of my heels on the marble floor the only sound in the lobby. I didn't look back. The fallout was immediate and blissfully silent. Graham's office confirmed receipt of the signed severance agreement within the hour. As promised, I instructed the security team to release Frank, who, I was told, sprinted from the building without a backward glance, and I informed Graham that I would not be pursuing the fraud charges. It wasn't forgiveness, it was a business decision. I wasn't interested in justice, not in the legal sense. I was interested in peace. I wanted them gone, and locking them in a protracted legal battle would, paradoxically, keep them tethered to my life. Signing that paper was the last thing they would ever get from me, and the last thing I would ever ask of them. It was a clean, surgical cut. The condo on Riverwalk was put on the market and sold within a week. The car was repossessed and sold at auction. The profits from both were wired by Graham into a new, high-yield savings account under a holding company so obscure, even I had trouble remembering the name. It was my Never Again fund. I took a 6-week medical leave. I didn't just recover from the pneumonia, I recovered from 2 decades of exhaustion. I slept. I read novels. I walked in the park. I sat in my cold apartment and for the first time found it perfectly beautiful. Lie peaceful. I didn't have to check my phone for the next manufactured crisis. I didn't have to brace for the next barbed joke. The silence was an unmitigated relief. I heard, through a distant family relative who called to awkwardly check on me, what had become of them. Margaret and Frank had, as I predicted, been forced to face reality. With no money, no home, and no Megan, they had been forced to do the one thing they had always avoided. They'd moved in with my mother's sister, Aunt Patty. Aunt Patty was a stern, no-nonsense woman who had raised 3 sons on a dairy farm and had zero patience for aspirational entrepreneurs. The relative told me, with no small amount of glee, that Aunt Patty had immediately instated house rules. Margaret was in charge of all the cooking and cleaning, and Frank, at 42 years of age, had finally gotten a job. He was working the 4 a.m. shift at a local distribution warehouse, packing boxes. The image was so stunning in its mundane justice that I almost laughed. It was a more fitting and more effective punishment than any jail cell. My life, on the other hand, expanded. With the massive financial and emotional drain on my resources finally gone, my world opened up. My firm landed the city council project, the one I'd almost missed. I took on new, ambitious designs. I traveled. I started sketching not just buildings, but my own life. About 6 months after the incident, I was having dinner with Graham, celebrating the close of a successful quarter. "I have something for you," he said, sliding a small, simple envelope across the table. I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for a small, odd-seeming amount. "What's this?" I asked. "Your Aunt Patty," Graham said, a small smile playing on his lips. "It appears she is meticulous. She called my office. She said, 'That boy Frank is going to pay his sister back, even if I have to garnish his wages myself.' This, apparently, is his first installment. It's 20% of his weekly paycheck, for, and I quote, 'the rest of his natural-born life or until I say so.'" I looked at the check. It was for $84.12. I started to laugh. It wasn't a short, harsh laugh. It was a real, deep belly laugh, a laugh that came from a place of healed lungs and a free heart. "Keep it, Graham," I said, sliding it back. "Start a scholarship fund for aspiring architects, or just buy the office some really good coffee."